New states shutting down all non-essential businesses with the coronavirus pandemic growing. The major disaster declaration for New York City.
We are now the epicenter of this crisis.
President Trump invokes the Defense Production Act, how it could help hospitals and first responders get the supplies they desperately need.
Global spread, new and frightening numbers from Italy and Spain. Cases soaring overnight as new measures are taken in the UK. Plus the Pope's plea this morning.
On the front lines, hospitals overwhelmed. Medical providers facing a critical shortage of masks and ventilators. The dire situation as health professionals put their lives on the line to save others.
Donating dramas. The popular TV medical shows pitching in to help.
Thank you. We appreciate you. We love you. Stay safe.
Closed Productions now offering their masks and gowns in the fight against the virus.
And celebrating the life of Kenny Rogers, his 7-decade music career dominating the pop and country charts.
You got to know when to hold, know when to fold up.
How he delighted his fans through the years.
Live from ABC News in New York, this is Good Morning America.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We really hope you're staying safe and following the latest guidance from health officials this morning. As we come on the air on this Saturday, more than 20% of the U.S. population, that is 1 out of every 5 Americans, has been ordered to stay at home. New York, Illinois, and Nevada now joining California and Pennsylvania in shutting down all non-essential businesses. Here's what we know right now. There are now more than 275,000 diagnosed cases across the globe and more than 11,000 deaths. Nearly 20,000 cases here in the U.S. with at least 260 deaths.
And President Trump approved a major disaster declaration for New York overnight. New York City's mayor calling the Big Apple the epicenter of the crisis. Home to 1/3 of all COVID-19 cases in the country. Concerns are growing about the health system's ability to handle the peak of the crisis with beds filling up and critical supplies dwindling.
President Trump closing the border with Mexico in addition to the border with Canada. The administration saying it is working to help Americans stranded abroad to get home. We have team coverage from New York to Washington, D.C. and London. Let's go right to Diane Macedo outside New York City's Mount Sinai Hospital this morning. Good morning, Diane.
Eva, good morning. All throughout New York, hospitals like this one are bracing for the worst. The big concern is that they'll run out of space or supplies to help people, as doctors say they're already running out of basic supplies to protect themselves. Now, FEMA has declared the whole state a major disaster area, freeing up federal funding that officials say cannot come soon enough. This morning, a major disaster declared in New York as the state reports more than 8,000 cases of the new coronavirus.
We are now the epicenter of this crisis.
In New York, confirmed cases have topped 5,000. Now the governor is ordering all workers who don't provide essential services to stay home, with similar orders in at least 5 other states.
100% of the workforce must stay home. This is the most drastic action we can take.
Illinois is also ordering residents that don't provide essential services to stay home.
I fully recognize that in some cases, I am choosing between saving people's lives and saving people's livelihoods.
With beaches in Florida still heavily populated with tourists and spring breakers, the state of Florida is now implementing an emergency order taking effect this Sunday, which will close hotels and resorts. Miami Beach Mayor Dan Gelber says in a statement, right now, as painful as it may be, the reality is we just cannot be a tourist destination. California is deploying the National Guard to distribute food at food banks in an effort to protect the state's most vulnerable. The announcement comes one day after Governor Newsom issued a statewide stay-at-home order.
We direct a statewide order for people to stay at home.
To prevent further spread, the White House says the U.S. border with Mexico and Canada is now closed for any non-essential travel. And to address medical supply shortages, President Trump says he's invoking the Defense Production Act.
We're invoking it to use the powers of the federal government to help the states get things that they need, like the masks, like the ventilators.
But how the president is using that power is still unclear. New York pediatric surgeon Dr. Cornelia Griggs is making a plea on social media. She and her husband are both doctors with 2 small children, desperate for supplies as they fight the outbreak.
What people are doing at the hospital is reusing masks that we would otherwise throw out after one use and writing our names on it so that we can remember whose is whose and to ration and conserve those masks that we do have left. And what we're doing in the meanwhile is using regular masks, not N95s.
But as testing becomes more available, ABC has learned that the director of the National Institutes of Health warns as many as 70,000 Americans could be diagnosed by the end of next week. So many people showed up to this drive-through testing site in New Jersey on Friday that cars were turned away.
And General Motors now says that it will work with Ventec Life Systems to help them produce more of those critical life-saving ventilators. Ford and Tesla have also offered to help. But while Tesla's CEO says ventilators aren't complicated, he adds they cannot be produced instantly. Time is of the essence here, guys.
No question about that. And those healthcare workers on the front lines of this disaster. Thank you so much, Diane. We appreciate it. We do want to move on. A member of Vice President Mike Pence's office has tested positive for coronavirus. ABC's Trevor Ault is at the White House with the details on that and fresh criticism over the messaging coming from the White House. Trevor, good morning.
Well, Whit, good morning. To our knowledge, this is the first instance of anyone on the president or vice president's team to test positive for COVID-19. We had seen a few members of White House employees go into self-isolation out of an abundance of caution. Now, the vice president's team said they learned about this last night. They assured everyone that this staffer had had no recent direct contact with the vice president or with President Trump, but they're in the process of figuring out everyone who they were in contact with so they can take the proper precautions. Of course, one of the big headlines right now, everyone in the country and around the world is looking for medical treatment for coronavirus. President Trump has been championing a drug called chloroquine. It's been around since the 1940s, used to treat malaria. But President Trump says it's a game changer in the fight against coronavirus. He said that it's going to be available to the American public very soon by prescription because he said the FDA had already approved it. Now, the problem with that is that the FDA, very quickly after he said that, said this drug's not approved for use to fight coronavirus. And Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health, he went as far as to say right now the answer is no. There's no concrete scientific evidence that this drug can be used to fight coronavirus right now. It will still need to undergo clinical trials. Having heard all that, President Trump says he is still hopeful. He says he's a big fan of the drug to the point that he says his administration has already ordered millions of units of chloroquine.
And still a lot of questions about how effective that drug will be as well. Trevor, I do want to pivot to that $1 trillion stimulus deal. Last night, the Senate was still at an impasse. Where does the timeline stand now?
Well, of course, everybody's waiting on this. A lot of people waiting to receive their checks from it as well. The timeline right now is planning still to vote tomorrow, or on Monday, excuse me. We know that top leaders from Democrats and Republicans spent 12 hours negotiating yesterday. They weren't able to hammer out a bipartisan deal just yet. We're told some of the sticking points are over an expansion of unemployment insurance benefits and getting aids to state and local government. But again, the plan is to try to get this hammered out through the weekend, vote on it on Monday, and then Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin says once this gets through Congress, they can start sending out checks within 3 weeks. Those negotiations are set to resume today at 10:30 this morning, Whit.
So many Americans will need that assistance. Trevor Ault at the White House. Thank you. Eva?
Well, the coronavirus pandemic is spreading in Europe, especially in Italy and Spain, where cases are soaring. The growing outbreak also is leading to some tough new restrictions in the UK. ABC's Julia McFarlane is in London with the latest. Good morning to you, Julia.
Good morning, Eva. Well, millions of people are heeding their government's advice to stay in, and more capitals around the world are closing their shops and restaurants. But the toll is still rising, and in the global epicenter, Italy, more than 600 died in a single day. A stark new milestone in the fight against coronavirus. Spain and Italy grappling with a new rise in COVID-19 cases, the number of new infections in each country soaring.
I never thought I could have entered such a nightmare. Not myself only, but the whole planet.
Spain now seeing over 20,000 cases, and in Italy, the epicenter of the outbreak in Europe, nearly 50,000 diagnosed cases. Hospitals in northern Italy overwhelmed, those helmets connected to vital ventilators, helping the gasping patients breathe.
It's very hard on the doctors too, on the healthcare workers, or together, because we risk every day to get infected.
Soldiers transporting bodies from Italy's Bergamo after the local cemetery became overwhelmed. In Spain, the health chief warning that 80% of Madrid will contract the virus. The country now on lockdown. It's the second worst hit country in Europe. And in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson ordering all bars, cafes, restaurants, cinemas and gyms to close.
By your actions, we are putting this country in a better and stronger position.
The government preparing to pay up to 80% of salaries, capped at $3,000 for workers facing job losses. And for the many Americans stuck overseas, desperate for a way home amid the global pandemic, a sign of hope. Overnight in Honduras, the U.S. military evacuating a group of American female football players to Charleston. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that the U.S. will use all the tools we can to get Americans home if they are stuck overseas by international travel restrictions, urging any Americans who can still fly commercially to come home. Dan?
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'll take it from here, Eva. Let's go to Washington now and bring in ABC News contributor Tom Bossert and the former White House, who used to be a former White House security advisor. Tom, good morning. Thank you very much. My wife is a former ICU doctor right here in New York City. She is hearing dire reports from colleagues who are right now on the front lines. They're talking about a huge influx of patients that they feel is being underreported in the media. Many of these patients, they tell us, young, very young, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. They say they have no protective gear. As a result, doctors are getting sick. They're running short on doctors. I'm getting reports of doctors crying in the ICU rather. Do you think federal officials are aware of this? And do you think there's a real plan in place to deal with this quickly?
Yeah, Dan, my heart breaks to hear that story, and it's unfortunately exactly what we've been trying to fight against and predict here and warn people of. The virus spreads in a way that grows that doesn't make sense to a lot of people because they think of growth in a straight fashion, but they don't think of it doubling, then doubling, then doubling. So these ICU capacities, these hospital capacities are going to be overwhelmed, and I'd like to do two things here, really. One dire is to suggest that if we thought, and I think a lot of officials did, that the Italian curve would start to peak by now, applying the Chinese experience, we were wrong. The Chinese curve is continuing to grow. Now, there's a reason why some deaths occur there that might not occur here with their healthcare system and standards, but their case growth is continuing to grow, and it's troubling. And the second is that New York is not the only epicenter, and unfortunately, the second one is California, another very large state. And so at this rate and at this pace of anticipated case growth, I think those hospitals are going to continue to be under pressure. And so yesterday, your question was, do people know? I heard an hour and 40 minutes yesterday in the White House press conference of a lot of effort, and we're doing a lot of things and a lot of positive spin on what we're doing. But then I also, at the very end, heard something very important, and I hope that the Vice President and President continue to remind people of it. And that was an acknowledgement that despite all of our efforts, millions and millions of these pieces of equipment, it's not yet enough. So we are now in a kind of desperate life and death type of almost 2 weeks before, maybe a week before, decision-making process where federal authorities are going to have to start shunting equipment to places that need it and away from other places that want it.
So we are going to have to make some hard decisions about who gets equipment right now and who doesn't. We only have a few seconds left, but let me quickly ask, we now have 1 out of every 5 Americans being told to stay home. Do you think that's going to grow to perhaps 5 out of 5 Americans?
Dan, such an important question. So one of the things we end up doing is speaking nationally as if we're a monolithic country. And right now, 3 states are in a really more dire position, right? I hate to say Washington, California, and New York. And they should anticipate a lot of stringent, maybe not just mitigation efforts, but we're starting to think about containment efforts. Those other states should view themselves as having time to plan, not being off the hook.
Tom Bossert, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Whit, over to you.
All right, Dan. North Carolina Senator Richard Burr is asking for an ethics committee review over his stock sell-off following a briefing on coronavirus weeks before the stock market began to plummet. ABC's Rachel Scott has more from Washington.
This morning, with mounting anxiety on Wall Street, at least 2 senators are being asked to explain why they sold off their stocks after classified coronavirus briefings before the outbreak. Senator Richard Burr defended the move In a statement, he says he relied solely on public news reports to guide his decision, personally calling on the Senate Ethics Committee to investigate. But before the market tumbled, Burr and other members of the Senate were told in a February briefing about the potential impact of the crisis to come. A day after Burr sold up to $1.7 million in stock, including shares in the travel and hotel industry. Weeks later, at a private event, he sounded the alarm. This audio obtained by NPR.
It is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything that we have seen in recent history.
But just last month, in an op-ed, Burr expressed confidence in the United States, writing the country is better prepared than ever before to face emerging public health threats like the coronavirus. Now he is facing calls to resign, and he is not the only one under fire. Senators Dianne Feinstein and James Inhofe also criticized for selling holdings before the market took a nosedive. But Senator Kelly Loeffler, whose husband chairs the New York Stock Exchange, tweeted about attending a coronavirus briefing in January. And on the same day, she sold more than $1 million in shares.
I'm not involved in the decisions around buying and selling. No longer do my husband and I have the ability to do discretionary trades, and that's why it's outsourced to third-party investment managers.
While Senator Richard Burr does deny any wrongdoing, he says he understands how this may appear to some, which is why he is calling on that ethics investigation. Now, lawmakers are required to disclose their stock sales. That 2012 law is aimed at preventing them from cashing in on insider information. Eva?
Rachel Scott for us. Thank you. And in this era of physical distancing, one couple is getting creative. They wanted to go ahead with their wedding, but didn't want to exclude their family and friends. Janae Norman has more on that.
I would love nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?
For Jara and Aaron, Instagram tells their story. Oh my God. From their proposal to everyday fun, it's all right there. We'll be holding on forever. So when COVID-19 derailed their wedding plans,
parts of the wedding that wouldn't have made sense in the current context of what we're living in. So we had no rehearsal dinner, we canceled that. We had no reception.
But they did have a ceremony. With social distancing and travel restrictions, the couple wouldn't be able to include most of their family.
We might not be able to travel and hang out with friends in person like we're used to, but there's still ways that we can connect via FaceTime, via Instagram, all this technology that we have access to.
Jara and Aaron deciding to stream their wedding in the same place their friends and family have followed their story, Instagram.
Do you take Aaron to be your lawfully wedded husband?
I do. You can maintain that connection, that normalcy with your friends, your family, your loved ones. It's going to bring that positivity and that joy that we're all really craving right now.
Jara's mother was able to walk her down the aisle while the rest of her family watched with love from afar on their phone.
It's important to really maintain that. And get innovative with how we're connecting and how we're boosting our positivity and morale each day.
So we're all adjusting to this social distancing. We all know how that means changing plans. That's why I'm here at home. But it's so great that that couple's still trying to be socially responsible while also celebrating those big milestones. Guys, back to you.
Jay, we miss you, but we're glad that you are protecting yourself and your health, especially since you're pregnant right now.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm sure it's me a ton.
She's already sassing me.
Making jabs from afar.
Physical distancing doesn't mean the knives don't come out. I love it.
The Dan and Janae rivalry lives on. All right, Janae, we'll talk to you very soon. Meantime, let's check in with our pal Rob Marciano following some difficult weather in some parts of the country.
I think that may be as close as you get to being invited into Janae's home.
Absolutely right.
All right, we had some rain yesterday across Ohio, really from Dayton through Columbus, a good 4 to 5 inches of rainfall. And we had this road that was cut through east of Columbus. And Franklin County, there were some water rescues, flash flooding, and some river flooding with all the rain that came through. For a lot of these folks, this is about as much as you typically get in a month. You got in one day. That front pushing through, cooler air coming in behind it. Next storm up, this is going to bring rain to the southeast and eventually a little rain and snow, believe it or not, to the northeast. It's time now for a look at your local forecast. Here you go.
Well, hello and good morning, Washington. After record high temperatures yesterday, today a lot different. 25 to 30 degrees cooler into the mid 50s. Some morning showers, but those will diminish. Some late day clearing. I think morning sunshine, Sunday afternoon clouds, high